listen to the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who will give us some insights about this WMO State of the Global Climate 2021 report.
Today's State of the Climate report is a dismal litany of humanity's failure to tackle climate disruption. Sea level rise, ocean heat, greenhouse gas concentrations, and ocean acidification set alarming new records in 2021. Global mean sea level increased at more than double the previous rate and is mainly due to accelerating loss of ice mass. Ocean warming also shows a particularly strong increase in the past 2 decades and is penetrating to ever deeper levels. Much of the ocean experienced at least one strong marine heat wave at some point in 2021. Professor Talas and WMO colleagues will unpack the science, but I will give you the bottom line. The global energy system is broken and bringing us ever closer to climate catastrophe. Fossil fuels are a dead end, environmentally and economically. The war in Ukraine and its immediate effects on energy prices is yet another wake-up call. The only sustainable future is a renewable one. We must end fossil fuel pollution and accelerate the renewable energy transition before we incinerate our only home. Time is running out. To keep 1.5 alive and prevent the worst impacts of the climate crisis, the world must act in this decade. The good news is that the lifeline is right in front of us. Transforming energy systems is low-hanging fruit. Renewable energy technologies such as wind and solar are readily available and in most cases cheaper than coal and other fossil fuels. Over the past decade, the cost of wind energy has declined by more than half. The cost of solar energy and batteries has plummeted 85%. And investment in renewables creates jobs, 30 times more jobs than fossil fuels. We don't have a moment to lose. This is why today I am proposing 5 critical actions to jumpstart the renewable energy transition. First, renewable energy technologies such as battery storage must be treated as essential and freely available global public goods. Removing obstacles to knowledge sharing and technological transfer, including intellectual property constraints, is crucial for a rapid and fair renewable energy transition. Storing renewable electricity is often cited as the greatest barrier to the clean energy transition. I'm therefore calling for a global coalition on battery storage to fast-track innovation and deployment. A coalition led and driven by governments, bringing together tech companies, manufacturers, and financiers. Second, we must secure, scale up, and diversify the supply of critical components and raw materials for renewable energy technologies. Today's supply chains for renewable energy, technology, and raw materials are concentrated in a handful of countries. The renewable age cannot flourish until we bridge this vast chasm. This will take concerted international coordination. Governments must invest in skills training, research and innovation, and incentives to build supply chains. Third, governments must build frameworks and reform bureaucracies to level the playing field for renewables. In many countries, these systems still favor deadly fossil fuels. We must prevent bottlenecks where gigawatts of renewable projects are held up by red tape, permits, and grid connections. I call on governments to fast-track and streamline approvals of solar and wind projects, modernize grids, and set ambitious 1.5-degree aligned renewable energy targets that provide certainty to investors, developers, consumers, and producers. Renewable energy policies are fundamental to reduce market risk and drive investment into the sector. Fourth, governments must shift subsidies away from fossil fuels to protect the poor and most vulnerable people and communities. Every minute of every day, coal, oil, and gas receive roughly $11 million in subsidies. Each year, governments around the world pour around $500 billion into artificially lowering the price of fossil fuels, more than triple what renewables receive. While people suffer from high prices at the pump, the oil and gas industry is raking in billions from a distorted market. This scandal must stop. Fifth, private and public investments in renewable energy must triple to at least $4 trillion a year. For solar and wind power, upfront payments account for 80% of lifetime costs. That means big investments now will reap big rewards for years to come. But some developing countries pay 7 times more in financing costs than developed countries. We need blended finance that provides the necessary structures to close existing funding gaps and unlock the trillions held by private sector. This means adjusted risk frameworks and more flexibility to scale up renewable finance. The management and shareholders of multilateral development banks and development finance institutions must take responsibility and be held accountable. I call on them, including their private arms, to fully align their entire lending portfolios with the Paris Agreement by 2024 at the latest, and to end all high emissions, high pollution finance. This includes using their balance sheets creatively to accelerate the renewable energy transition. And it means setting targets to substantially finance renewable energy infrastructure, including through technical and policy assistance. Commercial banks and all elements of the global financial system need to dramatically scale up investments in renewables as they phase out fossil fuels. Renewables are the only path to real energy security, stable power prices, and sustainable employment opportunities. If we act together, the renewable energy transformation can be the peace project of the 21st century. Every country, city, and citizen, every financial institution, company, and civil society organization has a role to play. But most of all, it's time for leaders, public and private alike, to stop talking about renewables as a distant project of the future. Because without renewables, there can be no future. As today's report makes clear, it's time to jumpstart the renewable energy transition before it is too late. Thank you.
Professor Petri Talas, the World Meteorological Organization has been coordinating the work of experts, national meteorological services, and UN agencies. What can you say about the report's conclusions?
Thank you, Brigitte, and thanks for coming to this event, and thanks to Secretary General Guterres for his wise words. WMO is publishing status of climate reports on regular basis, typically every spring, and also before the climate conferences, the COP meetings. We are also publishing reports, and we also publish United in Science reports before the United Nations General Assembly in New York. And of course IPCC, which is coordinated by WMO, and we have founded it, publishes main big reports. We have just published IPCC reports of 3,000 pages during the last months, and there we have the scientific facts concerning climate change. But today we are telling you about the status of climate last year, what is happening in real atmosphere, and what we have also learned recently is that this war in Ukraine has been shadowing the visibility of the IPCC reports, but climate change is still the biggest challenge that we are having as mankind. In this report, we are showing that we have again broken 4 records, and all those records are less comfortable. We haven't broken the temperature record. We have seen 1.1 degree warming so far, and that's very much that we haven't broken the record. Last year was the fact that we have so-called La Nina, which has been cooling the Pacific Ocean temperatures. But we have broken temperature records regionally. For example, we broke the European all-time high, 48.8 degrees in southern Italy last summer, and also in Canada they broke all-time high, 49.6 degrees in western Canada, and such records were broken also in Spain and Turkey. But we have broken record in ocean heat, which is more conservative than the atmospheric temperatures, which are varying according to these ocean temperatures. So we have now record amount of heat stored in the oceans, and 90% of the excess heat that we have produced to the planet, they are stored in ocean. And then we have broken records in main greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide, and especially the record in carbon dioxide is striking. We haven't seen any any improvement despite of the lockdowns caused by COVID in 2020. So the concentration still continue growing. We have broken record in the sea level rise. It used to be about 2 millimeters per year 20 years ago, but recently we have seen 4.5 millimeters per year sea level rise, which is a record so far. And then oceans serve as a sink of carbon dioxide, and that means that once we inject more carbon dioxide in the seawater, we are changing the chemical composition of seawater, and we have broken record in ocean acidity, which is a long-term threat for several ocean ecosystems like corals. We have seen glacier melting to continue, which is contributing to the sea level rise that are reported, and especially the Greenland and Antarctic glaciers are having major impact on sea level rise. And we have also seen this sea ice shrinking continued in the Arctic and also in Antarctica. And we just reported last week that there's a 50% chance that we would reach the low limit of Paris Agreement during the coming 5 years on temporary basis, not on permanent basis, but on temporary basis. And last year we saw several disasters. The most expensive disaster was Hurricane Ida, which was hitting United States with $75 billion losses. We saw casualties in China, India, Germany, and Belgium related to flooding events. So those are also possible in developed countries. And in North America, we saw casualties, 600 casualties, which were related to these forest fires and heat waves in USA, Western USA, and Western Canada. And then we have seen an increase in the food insecurity. So we have more people suffering of hunger. There's a component coming from climate change. There's a component coming from this COVID crisis. And there's a high risk now because of the war in Ukraine that we would see major hunger problems. Last year we estimated it's 800 million people globally who are suffering of hunger, and 300 million of them are living in Africa. And then what Secretary General Guterres has asked us to concentrate on, we know that only half of our members have proper early warning services, and Secretary General Guterres has requested WMO to lead an exercise where we would have 100% coverage of early warning services in coming 5 years. And we have to invest in the basic observing systems. We have to enhance the early warning service skills at the national level, and also we have to enhance the global water management systems. And we are preparing such a proposal to be approved by the COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh this November. And the other major initiative that we are having on behalf of WMO is that we would like to enhance the greenhouse gas monitoring system and real-time observation system, what kind of sources of carbon dioxide, methane and nitrous oxide we are having, and how the sinks to ocean vegetation forests function. And there we have uncertainties there, and we have ground-based observations, satellite observations, and modeling tools to create such a system. And that's also something that we are seeking approval for at the COP27. But since I'm a former scientist, I would like to prove what I have already said by showing some slides. So once I studied physics and mathematics, the basic idea was to demonstrate that this is fact. And now I will show you some slides to demonstrate that I didn't just talk, but there are some facts behind. So this is the temperature graph that I already referred to. So we have seen 1.1 degree warming so far, and last year we didn't break all-time high because of the La Nina, which was cooling the Pacific temperature. But as I said, we have broken regional records, and the last 7 years period was the warmest 7 years since 1850. And I already said that we have broken these four records: ocean heat, atmospheric greenhouse gas concentrations, carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. We have seen record in ocean acidification and sea level rise, and I will also show you how things are proceeding with glaciers, surface temperature, and the sea ice extent. Next, please. And this is a story about ocean acidification. As I said, oceans serve as a sink of carbon dioxide, and about quarter of the emissions of carbon dioxide they are taken by oceans. The other quarter is taken by forests, and now there's an estimation that we are having most acid sea ice water in 26,000 years, and that's a threat for the ecosystems. Then I said that we have seen more than doubling of the sea level rise speed. In the past, this thermal expansion of the seawater was an important component, but there's a growing component of glaciers, especially Greenland and Antarctic glacier. They are contributing to that. And here you can see melting of glaciers, which has been speeding up, and there are two concerns related to this. We have more or less lost that game already because of already high concentrations of carbon dioxide, and we expect that the melting of glaciers will continue for the coming hundreds or even thousands of years, and that will also have a long-term impact on sea level rise. So the sea level rise game has been lost so far, unless we create means to absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So far we don't have such technological means available, and this is also a long-term threat for the availability of fresh water, especially in Asia, where the big rivers of Asia having their origins from Himalayan glaciers in India, China, Bangladesh, Vietnam, and here in Europe, the alpine glaciers are also melting, and there's an estimation that by the end of this century, only 5% of the Swiss glaciers would be present, and that's going to be a threat for the water availability in the rivers and lakes in the alpine region. The same is true for Andean region and Rocky Mountain region. And this ocean heat, as I said, more than 90% of the excess heat that we have produced to the planet by emitting, especially carbon dioxide, we have seen a steady increase of the ocean heat content, and this is also contributing to the sea level rise. The warmer ocean is thermally expanding. And here are the greenhouse gas concentrations: carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. And in carbon dioxide, we have seen almost 150% increase since pre-industrial times. In methane, about 260% increase, and nitrous oxide about 120% increase since the pre-industrial times. And out of those, carbon dioxide is the biggest problem. It has caused 2/3 of the warming, and its lifetime is very long, and that's our long-term challenge, and that's very much related to the use of fossil fuels. And here are some recent measurements from Mauna Loa in Hawaii, where we have the longest record of carbon dioxide, and you can see also the steady increase and even increased growth during the recent decades. And recently we have broken also records there. And as I already said, we have seen damages caused by disasters last year, and we just published our 50 years report some months ago, where we demonstrated that we have seen a fivefold increase in the economic losses related to disasters, and last year we got this Hurricane Ida, we got flooding damages in China, Germany and India, and this extreme drought and heat waves in Canada, USA, Horn of Africa, and several Asian countries and Latin American countries. And this spring we have seen record amount of cyclones hitting Madagascar with severe flooding and wind speed related damages. And I already said that this food security is one of the major concerns related to climate change, and that component is growing, and we are threatening the implementation of sustainable development goals in general. We have estimated that 10 out of the 17 sustainable development goals they are sensitive to climate change, and we all know that we are lagging behind in implementation of the sustainable development goals. And I already mentioned that the climate component has had a negative impact on food security. COVID pandemic has also had, and the current war in Ukraine is for sure having a major impact. For example, 80% of the wheat that is consumed in Africa is coming from Ukraine or Russia, and that's going to be a major challenge. So, and finally, Secretary General Guterres tasked us to prepare this major early warning service initiative, and our aim is to mobilize $1.5 billion during the coming 5 years to improve the early warning service access, which is a very powerful way to adapt to climate change. You get the money back typically 20-fold by investing in early warning services, and we have major gaps in African countries, Pacific and Caribbean island states, and here you can see that only 40% of our members have proper multi-hazard early warning services. And it's also important to be able to forecast the impact of weather events, and that's a way to minimize the risks of growing amount of disasters. So 27, which we are preparing as United Nations, we have had plenty of interaction with the government of Egypt, which is having the presidency of the next COP meeting. And from our side, we will have this early warning service proposal to be approved by COP27. And also this better greenhouse gas monitoring system is also one of our initiatives. And from the governments of Egypt side, they are paying attention to implementation of the previous pledges, and also they will, the desire is to allocate more resources for climate adaptation, since the negative trend in climate will continue for the coming decades anyhow, and this melting of glaciers and sea level rise for the coming centuries. So now I have demonstrated that what I said at the opening is a fact, and I hope that you believe in those facts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary General. Now we have the pleasure to welcome UN Secretary General's Special Advisor on Climate Action, Assistant Secretary General Selvin Hart. Mr. Hart, you are joining us from New York. It's 4 a.m. in the morning for you. Thank you very much for making it and being with us. You will present further comments on behalf of the UN Secretary General. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And the time is definitely not a problem. When Professor Tallis asked me to show up, I always show up. And I just wish to salute and thank him for his continued leadership and for the leadership and hard work of all of the colleagues at the WMO. We are now officially at the midpoint between COP26 and COP27. And the reality is that the world is not on track to close the gaps on mitigation, on adaptation, and finance, which were acknowledged in Glasgow 6 months ago. So as we've learned from the report that was just launched by Professor Tallis, climate change continues to break new records, and all major climate indicators are, quite frankly, heading in the wrong direction. And without much greater action and much greater ambition, much greater urgency, we are about to lose the narrow window of opportunity to keep the 1.5-degree goal of the Paris Agreement alive, and thereby protect people and livelihoods from even worse impacts from the climate crisis. So it is also abundantly clear that moving much faster to a renewable energy future is the only way to provide us with an opportunity to keep the 1.5-degree goal alive, while simultaneously ensuring energy security and economic growth and creating new and exciting jobs. And this is why the UN Secretary General today has announced these very concrete actions that are urgently needed to jumpstart the renewable energy transition. So allow me to provide some further context very briefly. First, we need to make renewable energy technologies a global public good and a basis for international cooperation and coordination. And while the cost of renewable energy technologies have been falling quickly, wind by 55% over the last decade, solar by 85%, and battery storage by 85% over the course of the last decade, we really need to accelerate the decline of the cost of renewable energy technologies, as well as the efficiency, for example, of battery storage, to further ensure that we can deploy renewable energy technologies in really, quite frankly, in the places that need it most. And this is why on the issue of battery storage, the Secretary General has asked for a coalition led by governments, really to ensure that there's much greater international coordination around innovation and development of battery storage technologies. Secondly, the Secretary General has asked to ensure much greater diversity of global supply chains around renewable energy technologies. We must urgently ramp up the production of renewable energy technologies in every region, in every corner of the globe, to ensure that they can be rapidly deployed, as I said earlier, in the places that need it most. Third, and this is really low-hanging fruit, all countries need to accelerate domestic, legal, policy, and regulatory reforms to ensure that, at a minimum, renewable energy technologies have a level playing field. This includes setting more ambitious national renewable energy targets, reducing red tape and bureaucracy, setting a price on carbon, and streamlining and fast-tracking renewable energy projects. Developers, investors, financiers, and ordinary citizens urgently need a high degree of predictability and certainty around the production and deployment of renewable energy. On permitting and fast tracking, it takes close to 8 years, I've been told, in the European Union for an approval of a wind energy project. In the United States, I'm also told that one has to go through at least 28 federal agencies, and this is just at the federal level, for the approval of a renewable energy, for some renewable energy projects. And this could take around 1 decade, 10 years, and we don't have 10 years in order to close the important mitigation gaps. This will take 10. So fast tracking, permitting, and accelerating the rest domestic policy reforms represent low-hanging fruit. The Secretary General has also called and continues to call for shifting subsidies from fossil fuels to renewable energy, while of course ensuring that there are protections and safeguards in place to protect the most vulnerable and the poorest. And fifth and finally is the issue of finance. Finance is the great enabler, and we cannot have this rapid deployment without major shifts in global finance across the finance value chain, public and private finance, and finance in the multilateral development banks. The cost of borrowing, as the Secretary General indicated, for some developing countries is 7 times higher than the developed world. And this represents a major obstacle in key parts of the developing world. So, as I said at the beginning, we are really at this critical moment. We're 6 months away from COP27, and we're seeing the implications of the war in Ukraine unfold in terms of energy prices. We're also seeing many choices being made by many major economies, which, quite frankly, have the potential to lock in a high carbon, high polluting future, and will place our climate goals at risk, as well as energy security. So the time to jumpstart the renewable energy transition is most certainly now. If not now, then never. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hart. Now we will open the floor to journalists. Questions can be addressed either to our Secretary General, Petri Talas, to Selvin Hart, or to Omar Bado, the coordinator of the WMO report. So please raise your hand, introduce yourself, and specify who you want to address your question to.
Is it working? Yes, thanks. So my name is Bianca Rotier. I work for Globo TV in Brazil. And my question is to Professor Talas. I would like if you could give us a big picture about Brazil, some important findings on Brazil. And also if you could send a message to the Brazilian authorities, what can be done to avoid worse scenarios. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, and thanks for the very good question. First of all, if you read this most recent IPCC report and see what kind of emissions have been coming from various parts of the world, this deforestation in Amazonian region has had a major impact on climate, and if you add that component to the other emissions coming from Latin America, it has a major contribution. So this is one of the big challenges worldwide, to stop deforestation of Amazonian rainforests, which is not the renewable forest as are the case here where we have these boreal forest zones. So that's very important to stop deforestation. And this is partly related to the diet. So this deforestation is taking place to produce feed for cattle, and this meat-eating culture that we are having is also partly causing this problem that we are facing in Amazonia region. And what has happened during recent years is that Amazonian rainforest used to be a major sink of carbon, but according to recent measurements, at least fraction of the Amazonian region has become a source of carbon. And this is related to drying of the region, and we have changed the local climate there. And there's a major risk that this area would dry further, and that would have a negative impact on the ecosystem. If you read this IPCC report on future soil moisture, this is one of the risky areas, especially if we go to higher numbers of warming. There's a risk that we will lose the whole ecosystem and emit lots of carbon to the atmosphere. So my advice for the government of Brazil is to stop deforestation and concentrate even planting of more forest in the region. And of course there are economic pressures and local pressures to continue deforestation, but that may be in the long run also very damaging for the country if we lose that ecosystem.
Another question in the room.
Given the data in the report,
can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, Robin Millard from AFP. Given the data in the report, can we look forward to ever worse climate-related disasters in the future? Thank you.
Yeah, we have two things to keep in mind. This negative trend in weather patterns will continue for the coming decades anyhow, and dependent on how successful we are going to be with mitigation, this will last only a couple of decades to the end of this century. So our success in mitigation is very much driving the length of this period. But anyhow, even in the case of where we reach 1.5, this negative trend will continue until 2060s. Growing amount of disasters and growing amount of negative impacts of climate change on human well-being and also on ecosystems. And one component of this game we have already lost. We have already exceeded 400 ppm of carbon dioxide, and that means that the melting of glaciers will continue for the coming hundreds of years, and so will do sea level rise. So this is a lost game already.
Thank you very much. I give the floor to Laurent Sierot now.
Yeah, Laurent Sierot, Swiss News Agency. Thank you for taking my question. Secretary General, you recalled that despite the lockdowns and the reduction of activity during the pandemic, we haven't seen any improvement in terms of greenhouse concentration. So how worried are you that this situation, because we saw during the pandemic the extent of the efforts required only in 1 year, and that might have to be replicated in every year. So with that and with the war in Ukraine, how worried are you that there might be at one point a reluctance by some governments and some citizens to do the efforts required? And secondly, on a shorter term, based on the first month of the year, what do you anticipate for this year? Thank you.
Thank you. Very good question. This fact that we saw a 5.6% drop in emissions in 2020 because caused by the lockdowns, especially in transport sector, and we didn't see an improvement in real atmosphere. This is partly reflected from the fact that the lifetime of carbon dioxide is so long, so this kind of one year's anomaly doesn't change the big picture. But if we would see that kind of emission reductions year by year, we could start seeing an improvement in the growth of carbon dioxide concentration. The war in Ukraine is a good question. It's what has happened, especially in media, is that the media attention is very much focusing on Ukraine, and especially the Western media is following that carefully, and that's why, for example, the last two major IPCC reports didn't get enough media attention. So that's clear, and the short-term challenge for many countries is related to energy price and fuel prices, and they may have also political implications. But what's happening now in Europe is partly encouraging. So the Europe may speed up its mitigation efforts 5 to 10 in the 5 to 10 years time scale. In the coming couple of years, it may be that we will use more fossil energy to complement these energy challenges that we are having. But in the best case, this would speed up mitigation efforts in Europe and would reduce the emissions in the long run. Of course, one should keep in mind that Europe is only responsible for 8% of the global emissions, and that doesn't change the big picture. But Europe has classically been a driver of change, and I hope that would happen also worldwide. But what's going to happen globally? That's a good question. And what happened at the Glasgow COP conference was that the G7 and European Union countries were making pledges that would keep us on track towards 1.5 degrees, but the rest of the G20 countries, and especially the BRICS countries, were not able to make such pledges, and that's one of our challenges, to raise the ambition level in all of the G20 countries, which are responsible for about 80% of the global emissions. But in the best case, the long-term consequence of the war in Ukraine with the higher energy and fuel prices would be reduction of use of fuels and more energy saving solutions and speeding up of conversion to electric vehicles and renewable energy and nuclear energy.
Thank you. Omar Bado, do you want to add something about this question on the science behind?
Thank you, Brigitte. I think Professor Talas provided sufficient information for this press conference. He pointed out to 4 key climate indicators, which actually are key components of the Earth system, especially from the ocean. And those 4 indicators, which have been broken this year in 2021, continue actually to be breaking in trends in the next few years. And the problem is that not only the climate system is changing, but also the ecosystems associated with the Earth system are also completely changing. For instance, the biological life in the ocean species are being extinguished because of this warming of the ocean and acidification. So it's very important to point out that not only the climate is changing, but the whole Earth system is changing, including human and also other species. And we expect actually that this is going to worsen. If today we can expect, for example, that 70% of the coral reefs are going to be completely demolished because of temperature increase, 99% of coral reef will disappear if we reach to 2 degrees centigrade by the sometime of the century. So the whole system is changing, the Earth system is changing, and the behavior of human also is changing, including security issues. As you know, for example, in Africa, there is a complex relationship between conflicts, climate change, and COVID and many other factors. So that makes things only worse and worse. So it's very important to keep in mind that those issues be on the top of the agenda of not only for the policymakers, but also the whole citizen of the world to change their behavior towards preserving our planet. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Another question from Christian Ulrich. You have the floor.
And thank you, Brigitte. Christiane for DPA German press agency. And my question is to Professor Tallers. You mentioned that it's the 4 out of 7 climate indicators. I know the temperature was not a record, but what about the 2 others? We are talking about glaciers and sea ice, if I'm correct. And it looks like the mass of glaciers and sea ice lost less ice last year than they did before, and that's why it's not they did not set new negative records. Could you explain how, or is there an explanation why this happened, why the loss was less than it was in the years before? Thank you.
Thank you. Very good question. We see this kind of natural variability in the sea ice cover, which is driven by weather patterns, how big, what kind of air masses we get to the Arctic area and Antarctic area, and also the ocean currents. They are varying year to year. So, and we have seen this kind of variability also in the past. So this is not an indication that there would be a positive development in that respect, but we have seen this kind of year to year variations also in the past, and we will see them also in the future. And all in all, we have seen major loss of mass of sea ice in both hemispheres, and especially we have seen loss of glacier ice mass, which is bad news concerning freshwater availability and also sea level rise.
Thank you very much. Omar Bado, do you want to add something for this question?
In 2021, we had a very active polar vortex in the northern hemisphere, which, as Professor Tallers alluded to, helped not to reach a new sea ice extent record. But this is only for a provisional time. If you look at the long-term trend, the Arctic sea ice is continuing decline, and also the ice melt in the Greenland ice sheet is also declining. So we have to look at the long-term trends, which is still a downtrend. So it's very important to keep in mind that annual fluctuations are not actually relieving anything in these climate indicators, but just put some pauses in the decline, but afterwards it will again start again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Selvin Hart, do you have anything to add to one of the questions that have been asked so far?
Yes, just the question that was posed earlier on the growing amount of climate-related disasters, and Professor Tallers fully agree with his response. But the reality, and we saw this in the IPCC Working Group 2 report, these impacts are unevenly distributed. And if you're living in Central America, South America, Central, East, or West Africa, South Asia, or in a small island developing state, you're 15 times more likely to die from a climate-related impact or a climate-related weather extreme. And this is why the work of the WMO, following the guidance provided by the Secretary General on March 23rd, to come up with a plan by COP27, a plan that ensures 100% early warning coverage for every human on this earth, is such an important and critical endeavor. The reality is, as Professor Tallers indicated, that it's individuals and peoples in these very regions who don't have access to effective early warning systems. And Early warning systems saves lives, it saves livelihoods, it allows countries to build resilience and to adapt to a worsening climate crisis. So this initiative being led by the WMO, which is to be delivered at COP27, will be an important and critical international response to this growing crisis. And I really want to emphasize and urge all of our donors, all of our supporters, the philanthropies, private sector, really to rally behind this important work being led by the WMO. We are in a crisis mode and we need all hands on deck to protect people and to safeguard livelihoods. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other question in the room or online? If not, I can give the floor to Petri Talas for concluding words and we will wrap up.
Yeah, thanks a lot for coming here and thanks for your very good questions. And if you want to have some offline discussions and interviews, we are available for that as well. And thanks for you who were joining already yesterday. So this is of course, it's important that we communicate the climate science to the audience. And although at the moment our focus is in the media is very much on Ukraine, but climate change is the major risk for the welfare of mankind, even more than these kind of short-term anomalies like COVID and or the war in Ukraine, although it's very, very tragic of both of them. But if we fail with climate action, we would see much more dramatic impacts on the welfare of mankind. So therefore, it's important that we communicate climate science, and that's supposed to motivate governments and various private sector actors to boost their mitigation efforts. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary General. Now it's time to wrap up. Thank you for attending this press conference. You have received all the material. Now the embargo is off. Please do not hesitate to reach out to Claire Nulis, our media officer, if you have any questions or interview requests. I also want to stress that Omar Bado can give interviews in French and in Arabic as well. Thank you very much and have a good day.